In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to photograph art using daylight, continuous lighting, and flash. The basic requirements to photograph art are a DSLR or mirrorless camera with a lens focal length of a minimum of 50 millimeters, and the camera must be able to shoot in manual mode and have a self-timer function. You'll also need a sturdy tripod. You can shoot art using daylight or continuous lighting or studio flash or speed lights. If you're photographing art using lighting, either continuous or flash, you're also going to need a diffuser. The most basic diffuser that you can use is a translucent diffuser. It's the internal part of one of those 5-in-1 reflector kits, or you can use a shoot-through umbrella. And if you want to go next level, you could use a couple of softboxes as your lighting modifiers. Next up, you'll need some way to mount the artwork that you're going to photograph. An easel works really well for placing the artwork on. I prefer to use a solid wall to hang the artwork on to photograph it. One thing you need to be careful of is it's important that you shoot in a neutral area. So make sure that your walls are either white or light grey, and avoid colourful walls that might create a colour cast on your artwork. And finally, you'll need a good way to manage colour. So at the basic level, you'll definitely need a grey card. Next level up is a color checker system, and you'll also need post-production software like Lightroom or Photoshop to do the final touches on the images. When you're photographing art, it's really important that you get the basics correct from the start. It's going to save you a lot of headaches in the future. So one of the most important things that you want to get right is you want to make sure that you're photographing your artwork square, and that's going to save you a lot of time in post-production. When you're photographing art that's mounted on a wall, it's really easy to get the image square. You just need to make sure that the angle of your camera matches the angle of your painting on the wall. The issues happen when you're working with an easel, because artwork that's on an easel tends to lean back slightly. So if you have your camera at a straight angle, you're going to find that your artwork is going to be tilted back. And so the workaround for this is just to lean your camera forward slightly so that the angle of your camera matches the angle of your easel, and then you'll have a nice square image. The easiest way to photograph art is when it's on a horizontal orientation. So if you've got artwork that is vertical in format, the best way to photograph it is to flip it around and mount it in a horizontal format, and that's going to be a lot easier for you to get that square. And secondly, you're also going to be able to fill the frame a lot better, therefore you're not wasting any pixels, and you're going to get a much higher resolution image. So you've got 3 different choices to light your paintings or artwork. The first one is daylight, and this is the most basic lighting for artwork. The problem with using daylight is it's not consistent. So if you don't have good, strong directional light, your exposures are going to vary day to day, and you're not going to be able to replicate the same workflow each day. You're dependent on the sun. But if you're just photographing art for To go online, then you can simply use your iPhone or camera phone and just use the daylight if it's not going to be used in a brochure or for reproduction. That's fine. A couple of things you need to be wary of when you're working with daylight is you want to make sure that the area that you're photographing in is neutral, like the tones of the walls are neutral so you don't get a color cast. You want to make sure that your daylight is nice and directional, so flowing in, it's coming like the sun's high in the sky, the light comes down and it bounces off the ground and floods into the area that you're shooting with. So it's nice, clean, open shade. If for some reason you have coloured concrete surrounding the area or you've got grass there, then you might want to lay down a white sheet or a reflector so that the light bouncing in is nice, clean light. The other thing you want to avoid is any direct sun coming in onto your artwork, because that's going to affect the exposure and not give you a nice consistent lighting. So you want flat, even lighting, and when you're working with daylight. The settings to shoot artwork in daylight are: you want to have a camera on a tripod. You want to have the camera shutter set to timer so that it allows 10 seconds as you press the shutter before the shutter goes off. This will stop camera shake. You want to set your file type to RAW. You want to set your white balance to daylight. Your lens is 50mm focal length or longer. Your f-stop is f8. Your ISO is 100. And then what you do is adjust your shutter speed until you get a reading on your camera meter of 0. Now you'll find that the shutter speed will probably be very slow because you're shooting in daylight and you don't have much light. So don't be surprised if you've got a shutter speed of under a 15th of a second. It may even be 1 or 2 seconds depending on how low the light is. When it comes to shooting with continuous lighting, one thing to remember is not all lighting is created the same. Now, you can buy continuous lighting kits for as little as $60 for a set of 2, and they will illuminate the artwork that you want to light or anything that you want to light fairly well. It's like a nice even light source. You can get a couple of decent softboxes. The thing to bear in mind is the cheaper globes are cheaper for a reason, and the one thing that you need to know is that all globes come with something called a CRI rating, and CRI stands for Color Rendering Index, and it's basically an index rated from 0 to 100%. The higher the rating, the better that globe is at accurately rendering colors. So basically what that means is the cheaper globes will put a color cast over your images. So they might be a bit too magenta, they might have a bit too much green in them. The more expensive the globe, the better the color rendering. So it will give you like a color. It will output a purer light source, a more neutral light source, less likely to have any cast. So what you want to look for when you're buying globes is the CRI rating of 85 or higher is going to give you a really lovely light supply. So that's one thing you need to remember when you're setting up or investing in continuous lights. The setup for continuous lighting is you need to set up your lights so that they run parallel to your artwork. Now, it sounds counterintuitive, but this is the best way to get nice, even lighting. So choose your light source, have the modifier of choice. Make sure that your camera shutter is set to a 10-second delay. And again, you want to have your file type RAW. You want to have your white balance, set it to daylight. We can adjust it in post-production. Set your f-stop to f8, your ISO to 100. And once again, you want to measure your light using your camera light meter and adjust your shutter speed accordingly until you get that camera meter measurement in the center, and that's what you'll set your shutter speed to. So it'll be, again, a very slow shutter speed depending on how powerful your continuous lights are. All right, so here's an example of the setup, and I've used continuous lights, and I have used diffusers as modifiers, and I've got my lights at an angle. Now, have a look at what happens if I change the angle of my lights. You can see you're going to get hotspots. Now, this image is behind glass, so you're going to also have to contend with reflections and glare on your images. So it's really important that you keep that angle of the lights so that you're feathering the light in rather than hitting the artwork directly. And that's going to minimize glare and hotspots on your images. If you're still noticing any hotspots or glare, simply move your lights further away from your image on the parallel plane, and that's going to minimize. And you can see when you're working with continuous lighting, you can see exactly what your lights are doing. So you just want to tweak the angle of the lights and the distance from the artwork to minimize any glare or hotspots on your image. One of the most frustrating things that you'll have to contend with when you're photographing any artwork that's behind glass or highly reflective is glare and reflections. So you can see, if you look closely in this image, you can see the reflections. And here's the setup. What you do is add a black directly behind the camera, and that will minimize any reflections in your image. So you can see that once I've set up the black, so here's the image with the reflection showing, with the black behind me, that's minimized a lot of the reflections. It's actually got rid of most of them. So that's simple. If you're finding that you're getting flare or from the lights hitting back onto your lens, then you might want to add some black cutters in front of the lights, and that will help with any glare or flare you get from the lights. All right, and finally we have photographing artwork using flash. Settings are exactly the same. So you've got your flash, whether it's a studio light or a speed light, you'll need a modifier to soften the light. So an umbrella or a softbox will work just fine. You want to have your camera set to RAW, set your white balance to daylight. You want to shoot at f8. You want to make sure that your focal length is 50 millimeters or longer, and you will set your ISO to 100. And we're shooting with flash now, so the shutter speed is going to be 1/125th of a second. Here's a painting that I've set up to shoot, and what I'm going to do first off is take my light reading. So I've got my light meter, and it's set to non-chord. I'm firing it with I'm using my Pocket Wizard to fire the camera, and you can see what I'm making sure that I have f8 evenly across the painting. So I've got it top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right. And you can see there I'm using my Pocket Wizard to fire the light meter, and the light meter is set to non-chord, and that's how I'm taking the reading. Now, regardless of whether you're shooting with daylight, continuous lighting, or flash, it's important that you get a grey card reading of the image that you're photographing in the light that you're photographing it. So if you're shooting with daylight, once you've got your light set up, the painting is lined up and correct, the first frame you should take is a frame with a grey card in the shot. And if you're doing it with flash or continuous lighting, take an image holding the grey card in the shot, and you'll be using that to white balance your image in post-production. Now, if you're photographing something for a gallery, or it's super high end and it's absolutely critical that the colors are accurate and correct, then you will need to use something called a color checker. So basically, this is a card with a series of colors printed on it. It's got the grayscale, it's got RGB, it's got CMYK, all the colors there. And this, you'll take a shot the same way that you do with the grey card. That gets, the color checker itself has its own software that you need to load onto your computer, and then it will load onto the post-production software that you use, and it enables you to create a specific profile for the particular image that you're photographing, and it will correct the colors and give you a far more accurate color reading. And I'll show you how to do that now. All right, so once the artwork has been photographed, we bring the files into Photoshop, and the most important file to start with is, on the basic level, the image with the grey card. And so what my grey card is a more advanced one. You may have a grey card which is just that grey section there. Mine's also got the different scales of white. I usually take a white balance off this second square here. I find it's the best one for a reading. So you bring your image in with the grey card, and I've got my white balance checker here, that little dropper icon. Click on that and it'll come along, and I'll just come over to that second square and I can do a white balance of my image. So we can see that as shot, the temperature was 5050, and there was a slight magenta tint. So just watch those sliders as I click on that neutral point. So basically what I'm saying to Lightroom is, this is the neutral part of the image, and through the magic of its mathematical formulas that it uses, it'll shift all the colors back to neutral, which is exactly what we're doing when we're selecting a white balance. So if I click on that, it'll go back to neutral. And so now we've got the correct white balance here for that image. All right, that was the daylight image. Let me show you the flash image. Here it is here. I'm going to do the same for that. And that's the white balance set for that image. Now, next level is working with these color checkers. So that's the image there. It's a little bit complicated and it will vary depending on the particular brand of color checker that you have. They're not cheap. This little piece of cardboard will set you back about $80. You can probably get away without it for now as you're getting into the photography, but if you're going to be serious about photographing artwork where the colors are crucial, then it's probably something that you might want to invest in. So the process to use this particular software is you want to firstly just crop in as tight as you can and as level as you can on this particular area. All right. Make sure that everything's in focus. Then I'm going to right click, and because I've already loaded the software of my color checker into Lightroom, I can come in and say edit in Spyder color checker, and it's going to come up with a little dialog box. I'm going to edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustments. All right. And there it is. And if I click on this, you'll see that all these little squares come up, and I just need to line up the little squares, make sure they're all on. Okay, and now I'll click on Save Calibration, and what Spyder Checker is going to do is make a little preset for that image, and it will set all the colors for it. So I go Save Calibration. It'll save the Lightroom preset as a file. I can name it, so I can say Canon. So I use the camera, and I'll call it my flash test, and hit OK. All right, so that's all done and it's saved. I can quit out of that. And now I need to restart Lightroom, and I'll do that and come back. All right, so I'm back in Lightroom, and the color checker software has created a profile based on this image that I've photographed in this lighting using the camera and lens combo, and it stores the preset under user presets. And if you remember, I named it Canon Flash Test. So watch the color swatches. There'll be a slight shift in these colors when I click on Canon Flash Test, and you can see that it's just brightened up some of the colors. So I've created a virtual copy over here of the other one, so you can see that the colors, it's not a huge deal, but if you're photographing a Monet or something where the colors were critical, it would matter. So the colors look slightly more muted in the original, and slightly more, slightly richer in the adjusted version. As I said, it's not a huge deal, but if color is crucial, then it might be something that you want to look into. But I think as a start, I think that having the grey card is absolutely essential. And so once you've done a grey card reading, this one I think we did the custom setting, then you can copy that. You want to copy the white balance, copy, and then you can apply it to all the other images, and then you'll have consistent white balance across all your images.